My name is Rabbi Diana Vila. I taught in the rabbinical school until a few years ago. I still teach online the Latin American programs of the Reform and the Conservative movement there. I teach mostly Talmud and Jewish law. Every year, Diane comes up with a subject that I have to think of what am I going to do with this. So when she said she's going to, she wanted to focus on our values, and considering everything we're going through in these last few years, and there's certain things that to me are a complete chilul Hashem, profanation of God's name in the name of Judaism, and that's what the world is seeing. So I decided that I wanted to focus on that. There's a lot more sources than what I brought here. It's like a selection of different things I wanted us to talk about and think about. But I think it's important to think of in what ways what we do sanctifies God's name, and in what ways things that we do actually are a profanation of God's name. Okay, so we'll try to discuss it. I started off with two verses from, here, take this before you go up. I started, you want to stay here? You want to source?
No, I just wanted the people on the Zoom, are they on? Because they came on to the Russian.
No, I have, this is a student of mine, Spanish speaking. Ayelet, ¿no lo querés escuchar en español en la última hora? Esto es en inglés. That's a student of mine, Spanish.
Hola, Rabina. Es que me he intentado conectar a la sesión de...
Pero si querías en español es en la última hora, no ahora.
Sí, lo sé, pero la de español no funciona.
There's only 4 I see here so
Should I
far.
ask someone to come?
No. If they have the right link, they're supposed to be able to get in here. This is all I have at the moment. Oh wait.
There's a whole group of states.
No, these are the people who connected to the Zoom in English. 5 people, that's all.
No,
I will stay.
Should be.
I will
There's a
stay.
group, they're on the other Zoom in the other room.
I don't know.
Let me find out.
Okay. Ayelet, si querés en español no es esta clase, ¿eh?
No.
Okay. So I'm starting off with 2 verses from the Torah. The first one is from the book of Vayikra, where it says, "You shall not profane my holy name, lo techalelu et shem kodeshi, that I may be sanctified in the midst of the Israelite people. And v'nikdashti betoch bnei Israel v'Hebrew. I am the Lord who sanctifies you." So there you have the question of what it is to sanctify God's name. The different sources will go more into this. We'll see in a minute. And the other verse that I brought is because it's mentioned in different sources, is the verse that says, "You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live." In Hebrew, v'chai b'hem. You're supposed to live by observing the law and not to die by observing the law. We'll see what the relevance this has. I am the Lord, okay? There are other verses in the Torah that also talk about lo techalelu, but I only brought these 2 because they are mentioned mostly. So the first source that I brought to you from the Talmud in Sanhedrin 74a is when they were discussing what laws you are supposed to prefer death and not to transgress them. And there are only 3 such laws. They are called in Hebrew Yihareg Ubal Yavor, that if somebody tells you do this or we'll kill you, one has to prefer death. But there are only 3, and we'll see in a minute that it's not only those 3, but those 3 in public in front of at least 10 Jews. We'll see that in a minute. So it's not that we're a religion that promotes dying, to sanctify God's name. It's like very limited. It's only these 3 things, and only in public, and specifically because anybody who sees us do those things will have a terrible opinion of Judaism, of what God ordained us, etc. So the Rabbi Yochanan was a second generation Amora sage in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, and he said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadak, by a majority vote, it was resolved in the upper chambers of the house of Nitza and Lida that in every other law of the Torah, if a man is commanded not necessarily a man, a person, yes? Transgress and suffer not death. This is a Sonsino translation. It's not the best, but it's what you have, the easiest one to find and to copy. He may transgress and not suffer death. Okay, for most cases, we are not supposed to die for religion. In most cases, you transgress and don't die. So he says, accepting idolatry, incest, of course, incest includes adultery and murder. Now maybe not idolatry be practiced in these circumstances. Has it not been taught, Rabbi Ishmael said, how do we know that if a man was bidden engage in idolatry and save your life, that he should do so and not be slain? From the verse, you shall keep my laws and my rules by pursuit of which man shall live, what we read before, right? But not die by them. So why would we die in order not to transgress the prohibition against idolatry if it says you're supposed to live and not die? So Rabbi, the son of Rabbi Yitzchak, said in Rav's name that you have to do it in public, and how much many make it public. And Rabbi Yaakov said in Rabbi Yochanan's name, the minimum for publicity is 10. And they learn it from comparing all kinds of verses. I didn't want to go into that. If anybody wants to, you can go into... No, that's from the next room, I think. Oh, okay. She's teaching in Russian, but they're singing. So they learn from comparing different verses and applying the rules from which you learn laws on the basis of verses, that the minimum is 10. So here we've learned that most of the time you should prefer to live and not to die. There's only 3 laws that are considered yiharegu bal yavor, that person has to prefer to die and not to transgress them. And even those 3 laws, only if you have it in public, and they're going to say later on in the same section that you're talking about in front of 10 Jews. Why in front of 10 Jews you shouldn't do this? Because anybody who sees you is going to say, oh, well, there's no big deal. So we do idolatry. What's the problem? Let's do idolatry, you know? So people, from what we do, and this is even more so when you have sages and scholars and people who are supposed to know what they're doing, or the rabbis in our days, if you see them doing something, and unfortunately, sometimes you have that kind of example, then people say, well, what's the problem? If the rabbi can do it, why can't I? So you have to be much more careful when you're somebody with authority and with knowledge when you do these things. So that's sanctifying. It's actually sanctifying God's name to not transgress these things, but also not to die for it if it's not in that very specific situation in which you have 10 Jews who are watching you and learning from this, that this is the correct way to behave, okay? The next section, and if you have questions, please raise your hand. I prefer to have them as we go along. Yeah.
Okay, the 10 people, when this was written, they had to be physically there. What happens today when one person puts it online and it changes? So how does that rule apply?
Actually, I haven't seen responsa that refer to that. I am sure that we wouldn't support a rabbi or scholar publishing something which is a desecration of God's name either, but we also don't have today courts of law that can apply the death penalty according to Jewish law. We don't have that for like 2,000 years already.
No, but they could be sort of excommunicated or something. I mean,
so it happens sometimes. There are courts, rabbinic courts, that excommunicate. In our movement, as far as rabbis are concerned, we have a committee of an ethics committee that studies all of these cases. Sometimes they sanction a rabbi for doing certain things, and sometimes they expel him. There are such cases because we can't accept a rabbi who's going to do things that are really completely against. It's a minor thing, and if he or she is sorry that they did it, and you give them a waiting period, or sometimes they're not allowed to be in community rabbis for a certain period of time, and there are cases where rabbis have been expelled, but that's not applying Jewish law, that's applying internal movement rules, because you don't have those things anymore on a global level that you can decide.
So it's more like a modern level, like morals and ethics and behavior.
Yes, we have ethics committee, and there have been certain cases where this has happened. We've had a few years ago, there was this issue with rabbis who were doing intermarriages. And some of them were expelled, and some of them left the rabbinical assembly before being expelled, for example. And there's been cases of financial impropriety and of sexual impropriety, and all of these things are studied, and if it's proven, there are sanctions, because today the rabbi is supposed to be the example for the community. If that's what the rabbi is doing, what are the rest of the people going to do? Luckily, there are not so many cases, but it happens. Rabbis are human also.
Makes sense.
Okay, in the Babylonian Talmud in Yoma 86a, there are rabbis who bring all kinds of examples what they think is a profanation of God's name. Rabbi Matya ben Cheresh asked Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in Rome, "Have you heard about the 4 kinds of sins concerning which Rabbi Ishmael has lectured?" He answered, "They are 3, and with each is repentance connected." It's really awful English, but that's what the Sonsino translation did, okay? If one transgressed a positive commandment and repented, then he is forgiven before he has moved from his place. If he has transgressed a prohibition and repented, then repentance suspends the punishment, and the Day of Atonement procures atonement, etc. But now comes the part that I wanted to look at especially. If he has been guilty of the profanation of the name, then penitence has no power to suspend punishment, they say, nor the Day of Atonement to procure atonement. Because what you've done publicly is really profaning God's name, nor suffering to finish it, but all of them together suspend the punishment, and only death finishes it.
Wow.
What constitutes profanation of the name? And here you have a few examples. We can think probably of a lot of other things. Rav said, Rav is first generation Amora of Babylonia, one of the very well-known ones. If, for example, I take meat from the butcher and do not pay him at once. And we're talking about a sage, a scholar, who goes in and takes and doesn't pay, well, that's terrible. That's a profanation of God's name. Rabbi Yochanan, second generation Amora of the land of Israel. In my case, it is a profanation if I walk 4 cubits without uttering words of Torah wearing tefillin, because he's the rabbi. Isaac, the school of Rabbi Yanai say, if one colleagues are ashamed of his reputation, okay, that constitutes a profanation of the name. It can be, in our times, mostly it's financial or sexual misconduct. That's usually what the cases are. Abaye explained, as it was taught, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God, that the name of heaven be beloved because of you. If someone studies scripture and Mishnah and attends on the disciples of the wise, is honest in business and speaks pleasantly to persons, what do people then say concerning him? Happy the father who taught him Torah. Happy the teacher who taught him Torah. Woe unto people who have not studied the Torah, for this man has studied the Torah. Look how fine his ways are, how righteous his deeds. But if someone studies scripture and Mishnah, attends on the disciples of the wise, but is dishonest in business and discourteous in his relation with people, what do people say about him? Woe unto him who studied the Torah. Woe unto his father who taught him Torah. Woe unto his teacher who taught him Torah. The man studied Torah. Look how corrupt are his deeds, how ugly his ways. So this is like, if anybody does something which is this kind of profanation, it's obviously nothing we're happy about. But if the leaders, the teachers, the rabbis, the people who are supposed to give the example are behaving in this way, then we said, what did he study for? What's the purpose? That Judaism didn't teach him anything. Look what the scholar, what the rabbi is doing. So by his doing that, he's not only sinning himself, but he's profaning God's name. The world gets to see that this is Judaism. That's what they learn in Judaism. So we have to be very careful what we do, and much more careful if you're in a position where people are going to look at you and decide that you represent Torah, because that's a real problem. Any comments on this?
It really makes sense because I've been in Israel for 3 years, and there are moments I'm really uncomfortable, ladies, trust me. And there are moments I said, wow, every day is miracle from Hashem. To make a long story short, not everything is anti-Semitism or something else. We have to look at our behaviors. Is our behaviors smell like an aroma, like a flower?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we can talk about that later at the end. There are many things that are done in the name of religion that are terrible. That the world looks at it and says, wow, this is Judaism, this is awful. And there are examples, and especially when you see people with kippah and tzitzit outside and all that, and this is the religious Jew. If this is the religious Jew, what can you expect from the rest of them? I grew up with under the influence of my grandpa was Rabbi Leo Young from New York, who was a professor of ethics, and we always had the message that if you're not ethical, all the rest of it is worthless. You can eat glad kosher and pray all the time and whatever, and you're being unethical, worthless. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, if one studies, I'm not sure how to express this, if one studies Torah, and this is a Torah which is supposed to elevate us, how could people study Torah and be unethical? Like, is it a little bit of a...
Because they don't see it as unethical. What you very often have the possibility of interpreting sources. For example, one of the interesting things that happened, I talked in one of my classes in another year, is how the relation to non-Jews developed over the years. If you look at the Talmudic area when they're talking about Roman idolaters who did, all kinds of sexual orgies and idols and all the rest of it. So there they were came out very strongly against them. And then in the Middle Ages, you already see the rabbis write in a different way. And they say the Christians and the Muslims, well, they're not Jews, but they're ethical exactly like we are. So you don't have the same way of looking at them like you had with the Roman idolaters. So, but some people are going to say, no, the Talmud said that you don't have to help them, you don't have to do things with them, etc. And if you want to, you can stay in the Talmudic mindset and say, well, all of the goyim are terrible, and I can kill any of them, and it doesn't matter because they're all that. But the Judaism has evolved, and we're not talking about the same goyim. We're talking about a different society. We live most of us grew up among Christians or Muslims, and ethically there's no difference between them and us, actually. So we should be treating them like we would treat any Jew, and respecting them and doing business with them in the same we would do with a Jew. And in almost any area, you can interpret things in different ways. So they think when they go and destroy olive trees and kill people, etc., this is the land of Israel. We can do whatever we want in the land of Israel. That was in the time of Joshua, in the time of the conquest, in the biblical time, when we had to conquer the land, etc. There are now 2 million Palestinians there. You can just kill anyone who's there. Very problematic. But you can always take things and not consider that the law evolves, that the situation evolves. Even in the book of Deuteronomy, it says that in every generation you go to the sages and the judges and the priests of your generation, because just like in any other legal system, halakha develops. If we were to say, like sometimes I used to give lectures and they would tell me, everything's already in the Talmud. I say, are you kidding me? First of all, there are issues that didn't exist at the time. If you talk about all the scientific developments, surrogate parents, mother I don't know, electricity, all kind of things that didn't exist. How am I going to say find the answer in the Talmud? I can find the principles that will help me reach a new decision, but I won't find the answer in the Talmud. It's absurd to think of that. And then even issues that existed in old times and the same issues exist today, but society is different, and we have to take into account how things have developed. And so even Orthodox rabbis can't say everything is in the Talmud. They have to go and look at the sources and look at the principles and apply them to the new circumstances. But those who want to be extreme may take things in the context that they were said maybe 2,000 years ago and want to apply it exactly the same to our days. It's very problematic. They think they're doing what the Torah requires from them, that they have a very extreme way of interpreting.
Okay, I think my question, I understand there are Shivim Panim with Torah and all that.
No, but I'm not only talking about that, I'm talking about development.
Is some kind of a problem with the Torah?
No, it's not a problem with the Torah. The Torah itself says that.
People can take it in different ways?
No, the Torah itself says in every generation you go to the sages of your generation, and even in every generation we don't have a Sanhedrin, so you have different opinions. But if you apply the rules and use the sources and take into consideration the new situation, the response are different. You can't tell me everything was in the Talmud. It's absurd.
No, I'm not saying that.
I know, but so there is a certain
How much flexibility is there? I mean, obviously there's a lot, because you have this book, this Torah, and it can be interpreted in so many different ways to whatever extreme.
No, but you have, the thing is, any legal system, and that happens even with a completely secular legal system, has its sources, its rules, and the precedents that you take into account. A judge doesn't wake up in the morning and say, this doesn't work for me anymore. You can't do that. So why should we do that in halakha? We don't do it like that. We have to, also in the liberal direction, sometimes they go much too far. They take the sources or the rules and they completely take them out of context, and suddenly anything becomes halakha. That's also not correct in the liberal direction. Not only in the more conservative
where is that
direction.
sentence?
So what you have to, when sometimes students tell me, but there is a responsum, I say, very nice, read it, see what he based it on, and decide whether you think it's valid. There is a responsum, there's some completely, in my opinion, a responsum that you can't really follow. You can't just say there is you have contradictory responsa. How can you have at the same time in the same place, for the same crowd, completely contradictory responsa? No, so when people tell me you have to be pluralistic, they're both valid, I say, no, I'm not schizophrenic. Two completely opposite opinions, not in different times and places and circumstances. In the same time, the same place, the same circumstances, completely, radically different opinions. They can't be both equally valid. It's absurd. So you have to have, not all of us have the possibility of, studying it and understanding whether it's legitimate or not what they did. But you have to first of all see how they reached that conclusion. And then there's always also a certain room for interpretation, but within the system.
Where is that?
What? Another comment?
No, I said it makes sense within the system. That's
Yes,
the
of
key.
course, within the system.
Within the system.
Okay, the Babylonian Talmud and Chulin says the sages had said, keep aloof from anything hideous or from whatever seems hideous. It says ki'ur, something that's ugly. It's in a different context completely, but they bring it as something that's obvious. You don't have to, you have to be very careful not to be involved in ugly things. Okay? And then there is also a source, a sugya, a section in the Talmud where they talk about all kind of things, rabbinic things that sometimes you can temporarily set aside if there's a certain emergency, etc. But when there is a biblical obligation. It's almost something that it's almost impossible to have an exception for it. For therefore it says, where there is a profanation of God's name involved, no respect is paid to the scholar. If you see someone, even if he's a scholar, a rabbi, and he's doing something that's biblically forbidden, that there's no way that you can justify it, there's no exception, etc., you don't even respect it if it's a scholar, because there are limits to what we can allow, especially if it's something that's going to profane God's name. Now, there are a few sections I brought you here from Rambam's Maimonides Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah is the code of law by the Rambam, and he, in some of his rulings, brings us examples of things that are they're considered a desecration or a profanation of God's name. And this is what he says in the laws of Torah principles. There are other deeds which are also included in the category of the desecration of God's name, if performed by a person of great Torah stature who is renowned for his piety. Supposedly, you have the head of the community, supposed to be a much more ethical person, a person who knows the sources, and suddenly he or she does something which is completely unacceptable. Deeds which, although they are not transgressions, they may not be exactly transgressions, will cause people to speak disparagingly of him. This also constitutes the desecration of God's name. So he says, there's a rabbi, maybe he just doesn't treat people nicely. That's not a law. But you see, that's the way the rabbi screams at the people and treats them not nicely. That's also a desecration of God's name, Maimonides says. For example, a person who purchases merchandise and does not pay for it immediately, although he possesses the money, and that the seller demands payment and he pushes him off. Okay? A person who jests immoderately, is made joking around, or who eats and drinks near among the common people, or whose conduct with other people is not gentle and he does not receive them with a favorable countenance, but rather contests them and vents his anger and the like. Everything depends on the status of the sage. The extent to which he must be careful with himself and go beyond the measure of the law depends on the level of his Torah stature. Going beyond the measure of the law means that you don't only strictly do what the law tells you, it's in Hebrew, Lifnim Mishurat Adin, but you go even further. To make sure you don't make a mistake, you're more careful. You go even further than what you're really required. The more you are in a place of authority and knowledge and people respect you, the more careful you have to be and maybe go a little further than what the law requires.
Rabbi, Yeshua Sheila.
Yeah.
I see the principle. Let me speak slowly. All this one makes sense and reasonable and logical, I respect. But how Torah interpret exception, what I mean, people who do not grown up in Jewish community, yet Jews, so if they never learn, don't swear God's name, and then when they return to Jewish community, and then they realize, oh, this is really wrong, and how this fit in?
No, so people learn. I'm not talking here about somebody who just converted or who just joined a congregation. You know, it takes time to learn, and etc. He's talking specifically, you have the leader of the community, you have the scholar, you have the rabbi, and there's law. The law tells him you can't do this. But if you're going to be an example, then you have to be even more careful, he's saying. That's what's called Lifnim Mishurat Adin. Not only the law says don't do this, be even more careful so nobody misinterprets. He's not talking about the average people. That's what he said. If it's a scholar, it's somebody who's an example, he has to be more careful what he does.
Leadership, he means.
Yeah, that's what he says here.
Okay, thank you.
The converse is also true. When a sage is stringent with himself, speaks pleasantly with others, his social conduct is attractive to others, he receives them pleasantly, he is humbled by them, and does not humble them in return. He honors them, even though they act disrespectfully to him. He does business faithfully, does not frequently accept the hospitality of the common people or sit with them, and at all times is seen only studying Torah, wrapped in tzitzit, crowned with tefillin, and carrying out all his deeds beyond the measure of the law. לפנים משורת הדין, provided he does not separate too far from the normal living and thus becomes forlorn. He doesn't have to be a hermit, you know? Just be careful what you do. To the extent that all praise him, love him, and find his deeds attractive, such a person sanctifies God's name. The verse in Isaiah says, and he said to me, Israel, you are my servant, in whom I will be glorified, refers to him. So we should send some people to read this. Okay. When he writes about in the laws of the study of Torah, Ilchot Yesodei Torah, anyone who comes to the conclusion that he should involve himself in Torah study without doing work and derive his livelihood from charity, okay, this is very relevant today. You have people who say, well, I study Torah, everybody else should support me, and I study Torah. I don't have to work, I don't have to go to the army, I have to study Torah and support me. Now, Maimonides is an incredible example because he was a doctor. He worked in Egypt, he was at the king, I remember, it's not called the king. What's it called, the Khalifa or something that he had there. He also, his brother died, so he also took over the family business. And he also wrote so much, late at night he would get home and still write and just sleep a few hours. And even though he really was terribly busy, he worked, okay? So he says, if you say, no, I have to study, let the community support him. He desecrates God's name. Okay, some of the people today should read Rambam. Dishonors the Torah, extinguishes the light of faith, brings evil upon himself and forfeits the life of the world to come, for it is forbidden to derive benefit from the words of Torah in this world. Today we have a different situation because people work as rabbis also, and so you would think he's benefiting from Torah, but they do a lot of other things. It's not only teaching Torah. Community rabbi usually has to be involved in a million other things and is not being paid specifically to sit and study Torah. It's a different situation. But in any case, it's not like they're sitting in the Beit Midrash all day and just studying, okay? Our sages declare, whoever benefits from the words of Torah forfeits his life in the world. Also they commanded and declare, do not make them a crown for self-aggrandizement. I'm a yeshiva student, you know, nor an axe to cut with. Also they commanded and declare, love work and despise rabbinic positions. All Torah that is not accompanied by work will eventually be negated and lead to sin. Ultimately, such a person will steal from others.
At what time, historically, did the idea of sitting and learning all day and not working, when did it start?
Actually, if you look at the Haredi world, even today, it doesn't happen anywhere else except for Israel, because in the rest of the Jewish world, very few study the whole day. There are always a few who sit all day. The majority work and maybe study a few hours at night. Go to Antwerpen, go to London, Manchester, New York, wherever. There are very few who sit and study all day. They know they don't expect the community to support them and not work. The vast majority work. This happened here because the state of Israel was founded right after the Second World War, and due to the circumstance that so many yeshiva boys were killed, etc., Ben-Gurion felt that he was going to allow a certain amount, but I think at the time there were 400 or something like that he allowed them to study and be supported by the states. I often think he must be turning around in his grave today because there are so many thousands that are in this situation.
It wasn't done in Europe before the Shoah, before the Holocaust.
I'm not very well informed about it, but just look at today. Most of the
There were a few who always studied. There were Inuit who were
okay, but that's a small amount of people.
But yes, a very, very small, and also in, I don't know exactly where, it says, there's no Torah without bread.
Yeah, that's Pirkei Avot.
Yeah, okay, and earn your
earn your money. So
You wanted to ask something?
No, I didn't.
No? Oh, I thought you raised your hand.
Even the Chabad, they say they take off a year after they're married to study or whatever, but after a year, they work.
Exactly.
They do, and they work a day and study at night, or most of them do go there on these days.
Yeah.
I even heard of a Chabad girl in Beersheba that now does Shilul Lumi. Because most of the girls are seminary.
Yeah, but it's changing. You have already a lot there. There are.
Very strange phenomenon. Almost every Orthodox man and woman friend that I have in my home state of Michigan, everybody work. Even rabbis have a business. It's very strange here. The new concept. New concept.
It's very strange.
Yeah. Why you don't want to work?
We have debates.
Yeah. Although American Jews working, even Orthodox
But Ben
working.
Gurion understand that the Haredim, they reproduce geometrically. And after 78 years of the state, there would be tens of thousands of them. And the Armenians
You can't play.
Oh, he did, oh, I didn't know that.
There were,
During the management, 70
Oh, we got on that.
state,
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
there was,
I don't
and
know. Oh, does he realize that?
now, but now the government.
And now the Armenians, but I don't even trust a lot of them, a lot of them are anti-Israel, I don't trust them, so they are. My own grandsons don't, so.
Hey, Rabbi, at the creation of the world, the Hashem worked. He took the only one day off. Why the old boys now work? Hashem worked 6 days. He worked 6 days.
Yeah, it's a different. First of all, it's not. You don't necessarily take that literally that God worked, etc. You know, it's not. Doesn't work very well.
He took the only one day off.
Yeah.
So why others not working? I'm just kidding, but it makes sense to me.
There are some verses in the Torah about what happens when you have to go to war. The sources talk about two kinds of wars. There's what they call milchemet mitzvah, is when you're being attacked, you have to protect yourself, or in the biblical times you had to conquer the land, etc., etc. That's what's called milchemet mitzvah. There's also what's called milchemet reshut, which is when, for example, you want to expand your territory, etc., but it's not in the same category as the original wars. The Torah says very clearly that when it is a milchemet mitzvah, when you really have to defend yourself, then there are everybody has to go and serve, and they give as example. For example, you just planted a vineyard and you didn't have a chance to harvest it, or etc. Or you just built a house and you didn't have time to live there, or you just consecrated, you just married somebody and you didn't have time to spend with her. There are different examples from the Torah. We can think of other examples today that we would say, wow, this is very unique situation. Maybe this person shouldn't be immediately sent out into the army. Maybe there are unique situations. But Rambam in the Laws of Kings, and it's a section called the Laws of Kings and Their Wars, okay? He talks about what the obligation is of going into war. And he asks, in which instances are the above mentioned individuals, this is from the previous paragraphs where they talk about somebody who built the house, planted a vineyard, consecrated a wife, sent away from the battlefront. So that if this person who just got married is supposed to go to war, you tell him, no, go back home. You just got married. But in what circumstances would you do this? In a milchemet hareshut. That is not where your whole community is in danger. It's a situation where you want to expand your borders, or different situations that you feel it's the right reason to go to war now, but it's not a life and death situation. It's not the time of the Bible when they had to conquer the land. It's not that kind of a situation. So that's what's called a milchemet reshut, where you, for some reason in ancient times, the priest and the judges today, the government or whatever says, we need to do this preventively or whatever it is, but it's not because we're about to be attacked or something like that. So he says, it's only in that kind of a war where it may be optional, where you decide this is the right thing to do right now, but your life isn't in danger. In those situations, you can say, okay, some of these people should stay home and not come out and fight. But says Maimonides, by contrast, in a milchemet mitzvah, when our life is in danger and when we have like an extreme situation, when it's really mandatory for us to go out and fight, the entire nation must go out to war. Even a groom from his chamber and a bride from her pavilion, from her chuppah, it says in Hebrew. I mean, it's interesting, it even includes the women here, okay? Because Rambam wasn't really a feminist, but in this case, what?
Why they don't include women?
No, he says in that situation, if you have women in combat duty, then she would also have to go.
I see, I think so.
Rambam is certainly not a feminist. There are certain places where he says things that, are not so nice.
He lived in the time of the...
No, of course, he's in the 12th century, it's a different situation, etc. But here he says, he's based on the verses in the book of Dvarim, he says, everybody goes out in these cases. He isn't talking here about Chilul Hashem, but connected to other things that he's saying here, you would maybe apply what he said before and say, if you're supposed to give an example, if you're the scholar, if you're the leader, if everybody else is supposed to go to war, how do you say, no, I have to sit and study all day, and that's what's going to make me win the war? So, of course, we always hope that God will help us, and that, it'll make it easier maybe to win the war. But we first have to put everything that we can into this, and you can't say, oh well, I'll sit and do nothing and maybe we will win this war.
So I have a question. Did the Hasidim today say that it's the situation that we're in today is actually Milchemet Rashut as opposed to Milchemet Mitzvah, and that would be their justification for not doing what everybody else is doing?
I think it's very difficult to say that now when you have Tilim and what's it called, and all of the drones and missiles and
soldiers being killed
it's very, for me it would be very difficult to justify it as a Milchemet Rashut because our lives are in danger.
You're not already mad.
But objectively people's lives are in danger, people are dying. It's not an interpretation that people are dying, it's happening. So I don't know. The problem is some not all Haredi, but some of them don't believe in the state of Israel either. So that's part of it. So what? So if these kofrim, what's kofrim in English?
Heretics.
Yeah, that's the government. So why should we support it in any way?
In that case, why they receive a benefit? If something you don't believe, why you receive a benefit?
Well, not all. There are Haredim that don't accept money from the state either. There are few of them, but there are some that also like
This Peleg Yerushalmi that we hear about.
Those are really extreme.
They're the extreme, they do not believe in the state of Israel.
I'm not sure the Satmar don't believe. I
But
don't.
I think the Peleg, they said something on TV last night that, I'm not sure, Alpan Shana, they kept repeating that, so maybe.
Well, they were screaming Namut velo nitgayes. We prefer to die and not to be and not to go into the army.
But this Peleg Yerushalmi, is there something that's only in Yerushalayim or they all?
No, they call themselves Peleg Yerushalmi, but I don't think it's only in Jerusalem because they did demonstrations in the Bnei Brak and in different places as well. But that's a very extreme group, and it's supposedly a small group. They're just very vociferous, but they're a small group.
What's interesting, when they were talking yesterday on TV, they spoke Hebrew perfectly, as opposed to a lot of the Haredim who stumble with Hebrew.
No, they mostly know Hebrew, except that if it's Lashon HaKodesh, so they very often want to speak in Yiddish and not use Hebrew for everyday language. But they live here, they have to be able to speak. What?
Yesterday they spoke
That's the
perfectly.
question, why do they live here?
Yes.
Because it's the whole land. Right.
What?
It's all about the Israeli society not working. That they can handle.
I don't understand what?
That they were living on the dole and studying.
Yes.
That didn't seem to bother the Israeli population, but this business about not doing your part in the
Oh,
Israeli
you're wrong.
army.
The fact that they live on the dole and don't work really does bother many
That's
people.
been all along.
I pay
but not
taxes,
this.
so he can sit
But
and
that
do
doesn't
nothing.
seem to bring out the word of
What?
No,
Yeah,
that's
well.
why it's really.
But I have a different type of question because after I retired, I enjoy studying with the young students, with the university law school students. A lot of them doesn't look like the religious to me, maybe 2/3. Little bit, I see religious. But the question is this. When I ask a student, hey, you don't want to be religious, why don't you become the next to come to the Masorti movement? At least you can be rabbi, you can do anything, you have no...
No, but the others are Orthodox. We're all religious.
But
Don't
what I
use
mean-
that word. That we're all religious. That you're calling the Orthodox religious. We're all religious.
I see, it's my mistake because
Yes.
I can find myself. So why they don't join the Masorti? What I mean, young
Because the
generation.
Israelis mostly don't really know what that is.
They know Orthodox or secular, they don't know conservative.
No, and if you're not Orthodox, they think everything else is reform.
USA is big, Masorti is big.
No, not big enough. No,
Really?
most people don't know what it is.
My shul is 100
No,
years big.
not anymore. And even in the United States, where it used to be the biggest movement, it's not anymore. The reform.
So why we have a disaster? I mean, why
We're not a disaster. We just. It's very hard to build it because you have a very big. The secular schools used to teach more Bible and stuff like that. Now they teach almost nothing. The average Israeli is bur ve'amharetz. They don't know anything. It's terrible because they have the main instrument, which is the Hebrew, but they don't know basic things. It's unbelievable. And so they think to be religious, you have to be Orthodox because that's the example that they have of the extreme rabbinate, etc.
So they do not know we are religious, but not sort of like a modern religious. Can I call it modern
They
religious?
see modern Orthodox, but
They don't even know modern Orthodox well, because who are the rabbis from the rabbinate? They're mostly Haredi, not all, but mostly, and they're mostly the ones who give the more extreme interpretations. That for conversion, for divorce, for everything, the most severe interpretation. So it turns people off completely. So they say, if that's religion, I don't want it.
Exactly. Most of the students, that's what they think.
Israelis are what we call modern Orthodox, no?
No.
No?
And even in the secular schools, when they need like shofar blowing or for Pesach, what do they bring? They bring Chabad and I've suggested.
That's what they know.
Bring a more secular, not secular, but a more modern.
progressive.
And then average Israeli says either it's either the Orthodox rabbinate or nothing.
So they're
Exactly,
not
exactly.
interested either. They come for the one day and not interested.
Look, I used to give talks in the army to kurs ktsinim, those who are studying officers' courses. And people will tell you things like, nothing ever changed and you guys come and change things. I said, what are you talking about? You think that you can live today with Talmud law? Orthodox rabbis have modern responsa that change things because you can't live like that. People just don't know.
Yeah. And I have relatives who say, no, I go by Rambam. But Rambam said you have to check every generation. What's the change in the culture?
They accept what they want, they don't accept what they don't want.
I can't hear you.
The question is also, how do you change, under what framework, where are the red lines, where is it, at what point do you say, okay, this is an interpretation of halakha for today that's acceptable, but going 2 meters further, it's already not. And so it's very hard.
It's much more difficult today. We don't have a central Sanhedrin. You have different movements. Within the movement, you have different opinions. You have to asel harab. You have to pick who you think is somebody who can give you the right orientation. And there's always, very often there's more than one opinion. So.
Too loud.
That means it's a half of that.
No. It's When I can't get it No, it's not tzitzu, but it's twirling. I told her to go in now.
But that is so sad. Masorti is a very religious and spiritual, also it fits with the modern state of Israel. And I don't know why young students, especially law school students and political science students, I keep telling them, you don't have to be Orthodox.
But when the state was founded, they decided that the rabbinate was an Orthodox rabbinate, and the rabbinate is the one that decides about kashrut and marriages and conversions and all the rest of it. And that's the way it, and for many years they've been trying to do a separation of religion and state, and they haven't been able to do it, partly because of the political system that always requires the support of the ultra-Orthodox to have a coalition. So that's all kind of things that have nothing to do with religion, but that's the reality that we live in. So I don't know if it will ever change or not, but Masorti and even Reform, they're both relatively small here. It's few people, and even, let's be honest with ourselves, even if we go into our congregations, how many people are really Masorti, that are observant Masorti style even? How many people? Very few.
Same in the States.
Very few. In every congregation you have maybe, 10% maybe, who are observant Masorti wise. Most of them aren't.
So what is the rest of them 90%? If they are
No, they come to a synagogue, they're traditional, Shabbat is, they want a traditional Shabbat, they want their children to learn certain things, but they're not really observant, not even
I know
observant.
what you mean.
They're not observant
Just
even
wrong.
according to Masorti interpretation. Let's be honest, that's the reality. So how can you influence other people?
I know what you mean.
But what about in America? What about the matzab of Masorti in America?
Oh, it's shrinking terribly. Shrinking terribly. It used to be the biggest movement. What's happening lately is that rabbis have people in the congregation, a boy grew up in his shul and comes to him and tells him, marry me to this woman, non-Jewish, without conversion. The rabbi says, I can't because I'll be kicked out of the rabbinical assembly. So he goes, gets married through a Reform rabbi, never comes back. The conservative congregations are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. The biggest one is the Reform today, and in the Reform movement, each rabbi decides what he requires, whether he requires circumcision, whether he marries with or without conversion. In Israel, Reform rabbis don't marry without conversion, but abroad, you have all kinds of, depends who the rabbi is. He may require conversion, he may require circumcision, he may not.
Where?
Abroad.
In America.
Yes, every rabbi is pretty free to decide what he requires or not. In Israel, the Reform movement requires circumcision and requires to study a course of conversion, and they won't marry without it. Maybe it's a more liberal kind of conversion, but they require a conversion. And they require circumcision. Abroad, it's everyone is to his own thing. So it's much. Depends. In Europe, I understand it's less so because there's more of a communal pressure. But in the States, they're very liberal. So the rabbi says, I won't marry you because I'll get kicked out of the rabbinical assembly. They go to a Reform rabbi or any other kinds of groups also, No, they're all kinds. They're all kinds. They're renewals and they're all kinds of things. Or rabbis who get smicha online. All kinds of things.
What I have found in looking at while I was in Berkeley, all the people there, and what I have seen is that the more the people want to change, the more the opposites become more radical. other
Well,
words,
that
they-
started, how did the ultra-Orthodox start? Because the beginning of the 19th century, when the reforms, that was a much more radical reform than it is today, started. So the ultra-Orthodox went to the other extreme. That's how they started. There wasn't even the
And
word
now we have a
Orthodox
problem.
before the
We have a
19th
big
century.
problem here because in the United States, most of Judaism is being conserved because of the non-Orthodox.
No, they assimilate. They assimilate at a tremendous rate.
I know, but what is being preserved there is because of the laxity of the Masorti, whatever it is, reform, and the people are more active in those congregations than they would in the Orthodox. Orthodox is sort of looked upon as being too much.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure because the reality is that you belong to an Orthodox community, there's a much bigger chance that your children and grandchildren are still Jewish than if you belong in a liberal congregation where things are watered down. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the reality.
It's true.
It's 12 o'clock, so I think we're supposed to.
Yeah, but we started late, so I'm sure that's why she didn't interrupt us yet.
Deanna, I would just like to get back to what
Yes,
the
sure.
essence of this is about Hilul Hashem
Yes.
and Nusrat Hashem. I know that many years ago, when my husband was a rabbi in America, you could talk about the rabbi could talk about anything. He could question the existence of God. He could talk about civil rights, anything else. The one thing that was asur, you could not question Israel. Israel was almost like the religion, the unifying force that really kept us together. And Israel was a source of enormous nachas to us. The Entebbe rescue, the Eurovision, even beating Russia in the, what do you call it?
לסיים או לא? אבל זה למעלה, אני צריכה למעלה בספרדית, בקומה 204, לא פה.
אבל לא רציתי לשלוח אותו פעם בזום, ביקשתי ממני שאני
אוקיי.
אם את רוצה.
לא, אז...
אני רק צריך לסגור את זה.
יאללה, שכחתי מזה, כן. What we're doing is sending the sources on the chat for those who are on the Zoom. Share.
לא, אני רוצה לשלוח את זה.
איפה צ'אט?
פה, אבל צריך לסגור את הפה וצריך לסגור אותה.
לא, הוא לא סגור. We're just sharing the sources on the chat for the people who joined us on Zoom. Yeah. Okay. So you can download the sources. אני עוד כמה דקות למעלה בקומה 2.
עד בקומה 2, אז זה 204.
204.
לא, תתחיל ל-201, כי
Thank you. Thank you. אוקיי, סגרנו או לא?
לא סגרנו.
לא, אבל נגמר? כי הם מתחילים לקום. Okay. So, yes, sorry, Rachel.
You know, I was just saying that this was the situation, this was the relationship to Israel and the enormous pride that we had. My grandchildren are growing up who went to Schechter, who come from kosher homes and Jewish camps, the whole thing. They look upon the different Israel, and they cannot identify with us. And they are put in a situation where they cannot justify what we are doing every single day.
But many of us can't justify either, those who live here.
You're right, but this is an existential danger to Israel because there was always tremendous division about all kinds of other issues. But about Israel, there was something that unified everybody. And this is no longer the case. And Amy Lynn.
I have no doubt when I see these guys with kippah and tzitzis out, with the olive trees burning the cars and hurting people and killing people, and the world sees these pictures. For me, there isn't a worse Chilul Hashem.
We see the pictures.
No, but the world sees it and thinks this is Judaism, especially because these are supposedly the religious
And our
Jews.
grandchildren see the pictures.
What can we do? Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Rabbi,